welcome to Markegy. Grab some coffee and let's talk about what's working in marketing, who these strategies are designed for, and how to be customer-centric while we do it. Hello, this is Leanne with Markegy, and today I'm joined with RajNation. You are the founder and chief pitch artist for Startup Hype.
Correct.
What is that? Tell us about tell me all about all these things.
Appreciate you. Thank you for having me on. Startup Hype Man, we've been around for about 7 years now and really focused on addressing what I call rush hour syndrome for startup founders, which is, if you've seen the Chris Tucker movie, Rush Hour, Chris Tucker and Jackie Chan, you remember there's that scene where he's like, do you understand the words that are coming out of my mouth? That's essentially what all these startup founders are facing. They've got this big idea in their head. They know the way the world is supposed to be. They know they've got a killer product. And then when they talk about it, when they go out and they pitch it, their audience, whether that's investors or customers or other stakeholders, they look at them confused, they scratch their heads, and they go, huh? What is it again? Or I would argue even worse, they say, oh, I get it. It's another insert generic app, SaaS, whatever here. And I would argue it's even worse because when the stakes are this high for these companies, you really can't afford to be another anything. You can only really be the only you, and people need to recognize that. So at Startup Hype Man, we focus on helping these startups become the GOAT to market. And we do that through developing pitches designed to really stand out and stand apart so that their audience recognizes them not as the best, but as the only. And that's a big distinction because the ones who can get recognized as the only and their true unique differentiation and appeal is really coming to the light and coming to the surface. When that happens, the scratched heads and confused looks start turning into people writing checks.
Yeah. And I mean, that's always a struggle, is trying to get other people to see that the value in what you're doing. No one wants to hear that their baby is ugly, but no one wants to hear that their baby is just another Uber, blah, 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 blah. Like
it's actually better if you hear that it's ugly, because then you at least know they don't like it. Yeah, and you can fix something or it's not for them. It's worse if they like, oh, cool, but they're like meandering with that cool because they don't know where to take the conversation or they don't really understand it, and then you never get a true yes or a true no or real feedback.
Yeah, that's true. I love feedback, negative feedback. I honestly, because I come up with so much of it on my own. I'm like, oh, I should have done X, Y, and Z, or, oh, that wasn't up to snuff. But sometimes we're harder critics on ourselves. And sometimes we're just not hard enough. And we just miss the plot completely. So how did you end up doing this? Like what's your story? Like, how did this come about?
So I think if you look at the entire spectrum or the timeline of my life, it kind of makes sense I'd end up here. Just in the sense that everything that I do centers around some form of storytelling and using a voice. This specific endeavor came through, I had a previous business before this, which was really focused on personal brand strategies. And what we were really good at was helping people answer the question, what do you do? Which, or rather, tell me about yourself, which most often came up in job interviews. So we got really good at figuring out people. Yeah, or that. Yeah. We got really good at figuring out people's personal, individual sort of life elevator pitches. And from there, we could just, we had a lot of good strategies, just could never figure out the right revenue model. And so it didn't really go very far, but we made a lot of good connections along the way. And as we were sunsetting that company, an opportunity sort of fell in my lap through one of the connections I had made over the years. And it was with a startup accelerator. And the head of that was like, hey, do you think you could also do this pitched up for startups and small businesses? Because we have this new cohort coming in. The last one that we had a demo day and it went terrible. And I know they're going to need help. So I was like, oh yeah, totally. I got you. And that was a phone call. Now, admittedly, I hung up the phone and frantically Google searched, what is a startup pitch? And through that, I I was like, oh, okay. I was able to like pick up on it pretty quickly. And I was like, okay, I get it. I just needed to know like the sandbox I was playing in essentially. And then I found a lot of the pitch strategies and stuff we were using on the personal side really pretty directly applied here as well. And so that accelerator that I was a part of, this was back in 2016, it accidentally incubated my business, right? Because I found through working with about 20 different entrepreneurs there, the ones that worked closest with me were having a lot of success. Like one guy went from idea for his business to like 130K in revenue by the end of the 13 or 14 weeks. And I didn't want to, I was like, hey, do you think our conversations, any of the stuff that we worked on helped with this? And he was like, dude, you literally showed me how to talk about this. I don't know if I'd have any of this money if you didn't show me that. I was like, okay, all right. It's like, there's some merit here. Some other people raised money and I was having the most fun that I was ever having working. So I was like, okay, I think we've got something here. Let's see if we can turn this into a business. And so that's how it got started. And again, that was like end of 2016. So kind of formally decided to make it a venture at the beginning of 2017. Started it solo, and now here we are all these years later, and we've built up a small team, and we've got others on the team making pitches as well. And the Hype Man brand has been growing, and now we've been doing cool content stuff along the way too.
Awesome. And for those of you that haven't sat through a demo day or just like a stream of pitches, is that the hardest thing that these founders have to do is not just blend into the stream of demos and pitches. Like you sit there and it's like, these are our, it feels like you're back in school. And I can say this because like in grad school, we had to do the same shit. And ours were better than the people that were actually founding it. And after like 2 of them, your eyes are just kind of like, okay, your financial projections tell me that you're going to make money. And, you know, this is why you're different. And it just gets to be like, blah, 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 blah. So standing out AI and having a story or just being engaging is such a huge battle, because no one ever goes to listen to just one pitch at a time usually. Or if you're so lucky that you have an investor one-to-one, like you have to be able to talk about it without like them being like, okay, cool. Like I've got other shit to do.
And not just that, but also in a way that makes it easy for them to re-explain it to the other people on their team, because they're likely going to have to now, if they like what you're doing, unless it's an individual angel investor, most often they have to now make a case for you to the overall investment team to say, this is where we should put our money. So it's got to be easy for them to now explain it back to other people. And the more complicated you make it, the harder that's going to be for them.
Yeah, absolutely. Because you can't give them homework to go research stuff that you just didn't tell them. and you can't, it's not their job to make your shit interesting. Like, they're not going to do it. They're going to be like, okay, I've got like 30 more of these to explain to my team. And if it's an angel investor investing their own money and they do this all the time, then sometimes they're a little bit more quick. They're a little bit more quick to make a snap judgment. You know, they're just, it's going to be like, yes or no, done. You know, they don't want to waste time with drawing out long decisions that don't need to be long decisions. So when you do it, as opposed to all these ways of, you know, making it boring, that like, how do you make it like more engaging? Like kind of like, what's your strategy in creating these kind of like differentiated pitches? Like how would you explain it? Like M5.
Yeah, the big thing here is, so we center everything around this pitch formula we came up with years ago that we call que pasa, which is, you know, Spanish, and a lot of 5-year-olds know enough conversational Spanish now. Que pasa means what's up or what's happening in Spanish. And that's the essence of a strong pitch, is you're telling people what's up. Now, this is the formula we use to develop an elevator pitch, but it's not just that it's your elevator pitch, it's that you kind of build your entire pitch deck around this KPASA formula and you fill in the details around this. So KPASA stands for PASA, problem, approach, solution, action. Problem, approach, solution, action. That is the general format to be thinking through and then pitching through. And when you have 1 minute, KPASA is there for you. When you have 3 or 5 minutes, you use KPASA as the centerpiece and you add detail around that. It is the sort of the grounding force behind whatever you're going to talk about related to your company. And the reason why it works, and we've seen it work time and time again with our clients, is because you're establishing a reason for why up front by leading with the problem. And you're providing context and frame of reference for why you would exist. Most importantly, you are leading with empathy. You are showing you understand your target audience and what they're going through, whether you're talking directly to them or whether you are talking about them to an investor. You're showing you deeply and intimately understand the needs of your potential customers. And for those reasons, you have a product that can help them. So you're tying it back to their core pain or their core problem or need. And in so doing, it makes understanding your offering a lot easier. It also means you don't have to say so much because some of the conclusions become obvious and natural if you do a good job at articulating the problem.
Yeah. And I mean, one would argue that being able to present what you do in this format is the foundation of your sales, your marketing, your pitches, like all of it. Like there's never a moment where it's not relevant. But, that being said, there's always a risk or a mistake or something that like goes awry. So like if someone was going to take this concept and they were going to like try it themselves, like what are some things that you're just like, don't do this or if you do this, think about it like this way.
Don't lead with a market size number. I see this time and time again. The reason you don't want to do this is simply leading with a market size number, like, I don't know, like insurance is a $38 billion annual industry, something like that. That's a hypothetical number, but you get the point. You're going to automatically lump yourselves in with the 95% of other entrepreneurs who lead with that number, who lead with a number and think that's the big point. But that's not the big point. It's also not unique to you or a differentiator or anything like that. It's a number that anyone can claim. It's also inherently, numbers on their own inherently lack context. So whatever magnitude or weight you think that $1 billion number carries, it's not there if you lead with that big number, because we don't have any context around why that number matters. The other important thing with this is we also can't picture what $1 billion of anything looks like. So you're creating a vague concept as your lead message if you lead with a market size number, right? Like if I ask you, Leanne, what does $1 billion look like? Like, can you describe that back to me? I'm actually curious. Describe back what $1 billion looks like.
Yeah, I mean, like I wouldn't know like the volume of whatever denomination bill. Like I wouldn't know like what equivalent physical space that looks like.
Right.
And I think that that's a really crucial component. Is like it's just so abstract.
We don't know what 1 billion people looks like. We don't know what $1 billion looks like. We certainly don't know what 10 billion or 30 billion of these things is. At best, we can picture what like fills up a large stadium of people, right? So like, I think University of Michigan probably has the biggest stadium. It's like 110,000 people or 120,000 people. That's probably the biggest thing we are capable of picturing. And even that, if you think about it, you think of a sea of faces, but nothing, you don't think of any individual face, right? You just think of like a blur of people. So what's really important is you bring it down to the value of one. What does this problem look like for one individual person? Start there. Highlight that. And use that as the entry point to talk about your solution for that one individual person or company or entity. And then once you've gotten that out, then depending on the situation, you can say something like, and by the way, that's representative of like that one person, or this issue is experienced across X hundred thousands of people, or is makes up a market that is this much money. That's how the number has a lot more impact. The other thing that I think is a big miss is not taking enough of a stance because you're worried about potentially crowding out some people. But you've got to, another analogy we like to use is like, think of yourself as a superhero, but it's also your job to set the village on fire and burn it to the ground. Meaning like the problem has to be real and you've got to like go in on it. It's not how like maybe kind of sort of this is an issue for some people. It's like, no, for your market, if they knew a better way, they would have figured it out by now. So it is or it is not. There are a couple exceptions to that rule. And one that I can think of is years ago, we worked with a company in the STI and STD prevention space. And we couldn't say in that one, every time you have sex, you contract a disease. So that was one where we went with like and then using the maybe language actually made it a little bit more kitschy. And it was the message, the lead message was, sometimes when you go out and have a good time, you catch more than just feelings. Right. And so there's like some humor built into that, but it's obviously that's a case where you can't be like, every time you touch another person, you're getting a disease.
Right. Because one, that's not true. And two, ew, yeah. But I like the way that you phrased it instead. I think that for that one, it still elicits the feeling, the what if feeling. And when we're storytelling or when we're doing marketing or we're doing like, visualizations, just the human brain works better when it can equate sensory details to what we're doing. So if, you talked about the storytelling and making it a good story and starting with something that's too abstract. Well, yeah, you can't feel a number. You can't smell a number. You can't, what sound does the number make? Like you can't get into those physical sensory experiences that make storytelling like stick with people the same way when you start off without the problem, without the feeling, without the, the ability to envision yourself in it. And, I think that makes a really big difference. And then also when you hedge too much, you're just like, well, maybe this might be a problem. Okay, well, that doesn't elicit any feelings either. Like, okay.
Like, why should anyone do anything about it if it's not really a problem?
Yeah, like, okay, well, I'll remember that for later. Or not. Who knows? And so I hear you that, there's definitely some ways that this could go awry, and it comes down to the how of what you're doing. Now, when you're thinking about like the impact and kind of like doing it right, or when it's, what are some ways that this really kind of helps the bottom line? Like, is there any, if you have any like numbers like, oh, well, in this many % we did it this way and this was the result. Like we love stuff like that. But even anecdotally, like you shared a couple stories with us, but what are some ways that this creates like revenue or long-term wins or short-term wins or was really just stood out?
Yeah. I mean, this is literally what's been the backbone behind pitches that have done anything from winning $5,000, $10,000, $25,000, $100,000 pitch competitions, all the way up to raising $5 million, $25 million, $25 million rounds. So it has real significant impact behind it. It also allows you to, it's not just that it's a pitch that you use in like a singular method, it becomes the building block that all of your communication then derives from. So if you have that right up front, it makes figuring out the messaging for everything else so much easier, because it should all tie back to that core message. We've had sales teams utilize this stuff, and it's weird in sales. Everyone's like, no, you can never talk first. And it's like, or you could give them a pretty quick understanding of what you do, so they know what kind of conversation is the right conversation to have with you. And we've seen recordings on calls where sales reps are like, they deliver that que pasa, and the buyer will be like, I'm really happy you shared that. I didn't realize it was this also. So that's really helpful to know. And then they'll start talking about whatever's going on their side. And, again, we've also seen it influence close rates and things of that nature too.
Often, yeah. I mean, I could imagine that for the person or the people, the team that raised millions of dollars in their fundraising, then they're able to employ other people. They're able to deploy like on a greater scale. They're able to accomplish a lot with that type of investment. That can really be the difference between whether or not that startup moves on and continues to exist, or if it just fizzles and disappears. And that can really impact not just singular people's lives, but everyone that could work for them, and then the economy as a whole too.
That's one of the things we talk about a lot is what every startup founder cares about is money, and that can mean investment, getting an investment or revenue, but money can also mean being able to employ people, create local jobs in the economy, provide for your family, create generational wealth. All of those things are what's baked into the concept of money. And that's like the trickle down of, if you get it right up front and you get the initial money for yourself, now you can create the money for other people.
Yeah, absolutely. Because I mean, that's the difference, is like, you can have a great idea, but if no one knows that you have this great idea, then it's useless. Like, if you can't get it into people's hands, then it might as well not exist.
And that's actually that second part of that quote, what you just said, I think is important, because it's not, when you think about a longer form pitch, like in a pitch deck to raise money, it's not just can you get people to understand what your product is? That's a small portion of it, but do you have more than just an idea on your hands? Can you articulate your go-to-market strategy? All these kinds of things become really important. So they don't just understand what it does or what your product does, but they also understand that they understand the real opportunity that's there for them, that they should be capturing alongside you, or with you at the helm. They understand you're the right person to captain the ship, and you pitch in a way that reduces their risk, or they perceive it will reduce their skepticism. Yeah.
So it sounds like this is a good fit for everybody. I'm just gonna throw this out there. My 2 cents is that this is the wrong fit if your idea sucks. It's still a good fit to try. I mean, it's one way to find out if you're ever going to get that product market fit, because if you don't get this far and give it your 110%, and then find out whether or not the market actually cares about it, that's the only way you'll get to that stage. But I do, in my chronically online time, enjoy the useless inventions that just shouldn't exist that people come up with.
Yeah.
It's my guilty.
I also think it's the wrong fit for, it can, like you said, it can be utilized by really anything and anyone. But I actually think it's almost not worth it for a commoditized industry or a commoditized product. Like if you're selling insurance solutions, and it's not insurance technology that's new and groundbreaking, you are literally like an insurance broker dealer or insurance agent. Could you help your customers at baseline better understand what a product is that you're offering, like home insurance? Yes, totally work there. At the end of the day, that customer's probably still going to make a decision based off of who can get me the best rate. So it can help, and then and just making it easy for them to
It all depends on
understand.
how you
Yeah,
position yourself.
but it's not like I think some of these commoditized industries where we just kind of we just shop on lowest price. It's not like the K pasta is going to be the thing that people are like, well, I was planning on spending $2, but now that you K pasta me, I'm going to spend $2,000.
Well, but here's the thing, is that even in a commoditized industry, is that when you position yourself just slightly different, right? Because what sets you apart from, there's going to be 5 people that have the exact same rate, maybe. What sets you apart is what it's like to work with you and what specific niche of that widespread, once again, when you're standing for everyone, you want to stand for only some people, without discriminating, because insurance should never discriminate. We need free and fair and accessible and, all of that. But what I'm saying is that if, let's say, there's a way where you can uncommoditize yourself and build relationships and build customer centricity and really call out a certain segment, then, you would still want to K-pos it. You would want to say, like, your problem is that you keep finding insurance companies that, they take too long, and then they have deadlines that pass too much, or, something about or they don't speak the same language you do, or they don't understand your unique needs because maybe you're at this stage of life or at this one. You can still address a specific problem and then explain how, you're the solution and how you are differentiated from the 10 million other people with the exact same rate, or maybe a couple basis points off, right? Because at the end of the day, somebody is going to be like, look, those 10 basis points were not worth it for the headache and nightmare that it was dealing with this conglomerate, commoditized, insurance, whatever, financial facet. People care a lot about that. And I know that, it's the same reason why we use Uber Eats or any food DoorDash or any other food deliveries, because at some point it's worth it to us to spend a little bit extra money to just not have to deal with
Right.
Discomforts or inconveniences.
Right. Well, I guess I think the point there is when it's a mature market, let's just keep using the insurance example, and the market is already generally problem aware and product aware, the problem you're highlighting is less about the need for insurance, most likely, and more about the problem that they may face potentially with other providers. Whereas if you're, say, a traditional or a more new to market tech startup, you're not necessarily painting the problem as the other providers that are out there. You're painting the problem around what does the buyer, the consumer go through that requires them to even think of needing a solution ultimately.
Those sound like the same thing to me. Because I mean, very rarely do you have State Farm being like, whoa, we're State Farm and we're not blah, 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 blah. What they are doing is they're saying we're this, that, and the other. So the majority of companies will market themselves not as we're, shaded in this, competitive thing. They would shade it as this is the problem that we're solving for you. It's just a very differently defined problem that is coupled with, the need for their product. So I see them as very, very similar, if not the same thing, but please go ahead.
So similarities, yeah, I think you don't have to worry about I should say this, when you're a coming of age startup, you don't need to worry as much about what the competition is doing or saying. You can focus more on just your customer and yourself. Whereas when it's a very mature market and all the players are basically known, you've got to dial it in more into what is the market doing or what's the competition doing versus how are you doing that differently. It's
a good way to think, it's interject some jobs to be done, right? Because if you're a new startup and you're thinking about what you offer differently, or what your solution is, and even if it may not exist exactly, people are still getting that job done somehow. And then you're competing with all of the things that accomplish that kind of thing, um, in maybe not like a direct competitor way. So, uh, it's not to be taken lightly. I think we can agree is that it really requires more than just a cursory glance of how you position yourself and how you go about doing the process of defining what the problem is and how you're addressing it. And in any world, the way it would be like the most wrong fit would be if you just don't care, or you just don't have the autonomy to go about defining it in a quality way.
Defining it in a quality way is and kind of the operative part of that statement, because you can say the problem, but if you say it in a way that's boring or
Exactly.
I don't know, it's too buzzwordy or just doesn't make sense, it doesn't matter that you said the problem because they still didn't understand what you were saying. Which is one of the things we have to, when we do this for companies, we got to figure out what's the easiest way to say these things and not get caught up in like the jargon, if you will. And I also think what's important with that is coming back to this notion of speaking to one person. So when you are figuring out your que-pasa, don't think about how do I broadcast this to as many people as possible. Instead, it's what if I were talking to one individual person about this? How could I communicate it to them? That will take you away from the big words that don't make a whole lot of sense. It will make it much more relevant and real. And it'll give people something they can sink their teeth into because they'll feel it. If you start with everyone's going to hear this, so how do I make sure it sounds good as a quote unquote broadcast? It's going to lose the meaning. Versus if you focus on one person, it will sound great in broadcast because every individual person feels like they're being spoken to directly.
So we haven't talked about it yet, but one of the ways that you do this differently, right? Because we talked about like what a typical pitch is like, or like all these like really boring like jargon things. Now you have some like amazing skill sets that we haven't even tapped into yet. And I want to hear more about like how this intersects with different medias and modalities and methodologies that are a little bit more out of the box to really get into that like quality and engaging and deeper way of connecting with your intended audience.
So what what I've been working on for the last 18 months, and we released it earlier this year in September of 23, was a hip hop album about the founder startup life. It's called Goat to Market. So, we use that phrase in a lot of properties, but Goat to Market is the name of the album. And, I personally have been rapping for a long time, and I started to find a niche in what I call founder hip hop. And it's funny, several years ago, I had the original idea to do this album. And at that point, my thought was more like, it would be like Schoolhouse Rock, but for startups, where I'd be teaching pitch philosophy or concepts through hip hop. But then I abandoned that because I was like, no, I don't got to teach people anything. This doesn't have to be an educational piece, because then it's also kind of gimmicky and whatever. Instead, it's just good music that resonates with a certain audience. And that's what this album is. It's a 8-track concept album that documents the journey of a founder going from idea to capital raise and all sort of like the ups and downs that happen and the changes in mindset along the way in between. And I felt like I had the ability to put this together because I've been an entrepreneur myself for almost a decade now, but also for the majority of that time, I've been working alongside other entrepreneurs, to where I think this combined collective experience gave me enough juice, enough knowledge base to be able to write lyrics that would really deeply speak to them as listeners and become, help sort of champion their voice and create this idea of like the voice of entrepreneurship. And with the album, that's what we've put out. And then it was very intentionally designed from a sound and song style perspective to be really meaningful lyrically to this subset of listeners, but also have mainstream listenership appeal. And I know we've hit on that really well, because I've gotten a lot of strong feedback from founders about how much it resonates with them. I had someone call me middle of the day out of nowhere, who was a founder in Silicon Valley, to tell me just how meaningful the album was to him, and specifically the songs that he was vibing with and what he felt on this one versus that one, etc. And I'll say I'm flattered. I got throughout that conversation, he made comparisons to Eminem, to Drake, to J. Cole, and to Lin-Manuel Miranda. Those are all people I look up to as artists. And at the same time, my brother is a doctor. He doesn't know shit about startup life. And he vibes with it. And he pushed it out to his friends, who are mostly other physicians or people in medicine or nowhere near the startup game. And those people are bumping it in their cars, and not as like a courtesy thing, because they're like, oh, hey, we're just being nice. But like, they're actually going out of their way to listen to it and add it to their playlists. And, they're posting on Instagram how they're putting it on in their car when they're driving, those kinds of things. And that's because the content, again, was constructed in a way where I knew I could do this with mainstream listening appeal. And I kind of modeled it off the idea that, how is it, like the question I worked off of was, how is it that I've never sold a drug in my life, but I can listen to Biggie's music, I can listen to Pusha T's music, and it's all about the crack game. And even though I've never been anywhere near that, I still feel I can like resonate or relate to it or vibe with it in some way. I can still find myself in their lyrics, even if I'm not doing that thing. What we did with this album was pull off the opposite, which was, we're going to highlight and put center stage the voice of the founder and the life of the founder, and whatever endeavor you're in professionally or personally, you're going to find yourself somewhere in these lyrics. And for that core super base or super user base or listener base of the entrepreneurs themselves, it's going to be doubly meaningful and triply meaningful for them.
Yeah. And I mean, that's part of, a lot of things that we've talked about so far is telling a quality story and being engaging and finding a way to like reach people on like that sensory experience. Music isn't just something that you like hear. If you turn it up the right way, you feel it. Like you can feel, and that's one of my favorite memories of so many songs is the bass line, and then what I can feel like when I'm in my car, like different places, and how it's more than just a sound. So to be cheesy, could we call this music-led growth?
Music-led growth. There might be room for that. Yeah, we might be able. I mean,
There might be.
I think
There
at
might
minimum,
be.
maybe it's content-led growth. But if we get hyper specific with it, yeah, maybe it's music-led growth. Instead of go to market, it's go to music.
Yeah, just it's funny because I have another episode that talks about acronyms, but I couldn't help myself. I love that you're using like goats market, because I'm all about puns. So there's a lot of things that are coming up, and there's a lot that we could talk about. I just want to ask you like one closing question. and then we'll talk about the stuff, the events, and the releases you have coming out. What is the question someone should ask you, but they don't? Maybe they ask you X, Y, and Z, and they really need to start at like ABC. Maybe they just, you just have this thing that you want people to know about you, and for some reason, you never get a chance to talk about it. What would be a question that someone should ask you
about? Now that itself is a good question. I think asking about my creative process might be a good question to ask, particularly around concepting these songs and how it all came together.
Yeah, we'll just press restart and just record a whole new episode. Done. Obviously, I'm kidding, but no, that is a really important question, and I think it's cool because everyone has such like unique creative processes, and it's really cool to see like the places where people pull things from to make connections. So that's also why I was asking about like influences or what's it sound like and things like that, because all right, so what's on the horizon? Tell me about like the releases, the events, like what are some things that people should look out for, and then how can they get?
Yeah, well, the album came out September 14th, so it's available on Spotify, Apple Music, Tidal, really any streaming platform, YouTube Music. Just look up RajNation, all one word, or go to market, and it'll pop up. We celebrated the release of the album with an album release party and concert the last week of September, and we built that. Along with that, we built an entire week of events here in Chicago called Hype Week. We did 9 events across 5 days. It was awesome. We had everything from educational events to entertainment events like the concert to networking and athletic events too. So it was just a really cool way to bring the
Sweet.
And I should clarify, startuphypeman.com is the website.
Yeah. Could you just spell it out for us, like letter by letter?
Yeah, startup, STARTUP. Hype man, HYPEMAN. Startup hype man. That was a trick question. Like, can he spell? Startuphypeman.com.
Who knew it would include a spelling bee? And now it's my turn. So if you have any questions for me, I'm always available on LinkedIn, or you can email me at info@markigy.com, info@markigy.com. Thank you